first Eurosport Super Racing weekend, the opening round of, among other things, the 2001 FIA GT Championship, and it's that race that we will concentrate on first on this gloriously sunny Sunday afternoon. Martin Haven in the chair alongside me, voice of reason, David Leslie. David, you've been experienced in touring cars and in sports car racing. You've had trips in both these types of cars to Monza. It's not the most complicated race car course, but for the guys in the Porsches in the middle of this top half dozen cars here, the start is going to be very tricky with the faster GT cars trying to wend their way through them right down to the first chicane.
You can see the start right now, and the drivers talked amongst themselves beforehand, and nobody wants to have an accident to the first corner. So the little NGT cars are just going to be that little bit more cautious. They're going to let the quicker cars past. We can see them now. There's 4 of them there in front of the blacklist, and Ferrari number 5, I think it is, right behind them there. And you can see as they accelerate out, they're just so much quicker. And here we are inside one of the Ferraris, and they're just accelerating past these Porsche GT cars like they're not there in a different race. In actual fact, overall they are a little bit slower, probably something like 5 or 6 seconds. But in reality, you know, the braking on the little Porsches is very, very good. We're getting a quick shot now of the Lister that came into the pitch just as we've seen the start of the race. One of them pulled off into the pitch. So obviously they've got a recurring problem from whatever it was this morning that was holding them back.
Well, that's the Julian Bailey car going in. Jamie Campbell-Walter, headlights ablaze. He's got the Emanuele Naspetti Ferrari. In front of him, he's got the second of the Ferraris, the Gabriele Raffanelli run cars. Martin Duez behind him. That's the second of the red Ferraris there, the 550 Maranellos. And in the inset picture, you can see that it's glum faces in the Lister garage, and they're not working on that number 2 car, so that is out of the race. Jamie Campbell-Walter now carrying the hopes of Lister. Behind there, you can see the darker of those cars. That's the former French GT champion Jean-Pierre Jarier sharing with Francois Lafont in their Art Racing Viper, and that car qualifying inside the top 10 in the GT class could be a factor as long as Jarier is at the wheel. Lafont, it is, I think, only fair to say, a real gentleman driver as opposed to an outright paceman. But the man out front is Christophe Bouchou, ex-Works Mercedes star and a very quick peddler of GT cars indeed. The Labra competition car, he said, was quite superb, although they've had precious little wet weather-free testing, precious little dry running, in fact. Bouchou says the team have done a great job to build and set up the car ready for the first round of the championship. And behind them, the 3 blue and yellow cars, the Belmondo cars in formation, the 3 of them, 11, 10 and then 12 in that order. Anthony Kumpen in the number 10 car in the middle of the 3 there, looking to try and make a move. His teammate right ahead, the 11 car, Didier Dufourny. The Belgian, in fact, the 12 car ahead is Boris de Richebourg. De Richebourg on his 3rd replacement gearbox of the weekend for the start of the race. Broke another one in the warm-up, having broken 2 in practice and in qualifying on Friday and Saturday. Jamie Campbell-Walter now right behind them. So within a lap and a half, the GT cars have dispensed with the lead, half a dozen NGT cars. And one of Jamie's worries going into the first turn at Monza here was that although the Lister would be able to power past some of the Porsches in a straight line, they do brake slightly later than the heavier GT cars, and he was worried that somebody might get very brave and come back down past him and therefore trigger off a problem. He said, I'm going to be very ginger in the first lap, and that has proved to be wise advice. Now he's passed both of the Ferraris, so one was behind him. He's now passed Emanuele Naspetti's Ferrari, which is the lead of the 2 red cars. David, it looks as though the Lister is as fast as it showed in the untimed sessions, bizarrely, for Jamie Campbell-Walter, because as you mentioned, in the 15 minutes after Superpole, when Tom Coronel, Jamie's teammate, went out, it set the fastest laps of the weekend, and again in the warm-up, comfortably the quickest car. So the Lister didn't manage to produce the goods for Superpole, but more importantly, seems to be able to produce them now in the early stages of the race.
Yeah, he certainly made a good start. He's been very cautious on the first couple of laps to get through all those NGT cars, those Porsches. And once he's through there, he's now concentrating on getting through the cars that he's racing against. He's got these 3 Belmondo cars. One he's just got past now, and he's got another 2 in front of him. And he'll work away and get through them, I'm sure. And he'll work his way up to the front. He knows he's got a long time to do this. This race is 3 hours long, and he can take his time and he can build on it. He doesn't have to do it all in the first 15 minutes. If you try and do that, you usually make a mistake somewhere. And I spoke to Jamie beforehand, and he knows he's got a long time to do it. He knows the car's good, and as we've seen before, it was just so easy for them to do a time and in the warm-up and things like that. So they're happy. They're unhappy at the starting position they had, but they're happy they've got a really good car for the race, and they're going to concentrate on just whittling their way through the race bit by bit to get through all those cars.
And Jamie, still a young driver, but a very experienced one in sports cars, both in Britain and now in the FIA series. And of course with Julian Bailey, the reigning drivers' champions, Lister the champion team from last year's season. Now the team that ran them closest in both titles right down to the final round at Magny-Cours was the Car Sport Holland setup, which was Mike Hazeman's and his father Twan Hazeman's running their Viper. Now they've got a pair of heavily modified Vipers here at Monza, but neither of them, David, making the grid, because one of the modifications they made was to put the oil system from under the bonnet into the back of the car, and apparently the oil pumps just couldn't cope with the length of piping to the front of the car. They blew one engine in both of their cars in Friday's wet practice, despite them never having had a problem with it in their limited so far testing this year. The engine that they brought down overnight at great expense from Heinemada's works in Switzerland failed to even start in the Hazeman's car for Saturday's qualifying session, so £75,000 of engine bills worse off. They haven't even got to the grid for the first race. That's a tough act to try and deal with from race one in.
It is. That's absolutely devastating. A team came here on top of the world. They did so well last year. They've gone out and they've modified the car themselves to try and make it that much better rather than use a standard car. But unfortunately, some of those modifications didn't work. And when you take an oil tank from the front of one of these cars, these are big cars, and move it all the way to the back, that's a lot of piping, that's a lot of oil, extra oil you've got to put in there, and you've got to move it around. And by the sound of it, it sounds like it wasn't moving around very well. They did change it and put the oil tank back in the front, but unfortunately, as you said, the engine that arrived didn't actually start, so therefore they were out altogether, and we've lost two cars that we would expect to be right here at the front in the race that we're following at the moment.
Lost a couple of Vipers from the GT class, as I mentioned earlier. The GLPK car had a problem on Saturday and didn't do qualifying. The Racing Box car was crashed on the first lap of this morning's warm-up and destroyed. But let's hear now from Julian Bailey.
Julian, you must be very disappointed. Can you tell us exactly what the problem is, please?
Well, we've had a few problems with fuel all weekend, and in the warm-up this morning we had a misfire start again, and it's basically making the engine run lean, and it's misfiring, and it really was a bit of a risk to take the start, risk the car, and risk, obviously I was in front of Jamie. We decided to, rather than blow the engine and maybe get in Jamie's way, we had to call it a day and save it for another day.
But you must be disappointed. The first race of the season, it's not the best of starts that you could have hoped for.
No, it's not, but the important thing is the car is very quick, and the chassis is fantastic, the engine's going well. We just had a few problems, but signs are encouraging that the car's going to be good for the whole year.
Thank you, Julian.
And David, those encouraging signs being shown there by Jamie Campbell-Walter as Julian Bailey was talking, diving down deep under braking inside the number 10 Paul Belmondo car of Anthony Kumpen and picking up a spot there. He's up into third place now, one Belmondo Viper and the Labra competition Viper, which is starting to stretch away in front. Now, we talked to Jamie before the race, and he was suggesting that the Michelin-shod tyres, Michelin-shod cars like the Lister and like the Labra Viper would, within 10 laps or so, have a performance advantage over the Belmondo cars, but it doesn't seem to have taken that long. The Lister is working its way up the order. That's a lap out of date. He's passed Kumpen already. He's right on the heels of Vincent Voss, and he's really putting in a move down to the Variante Ascari. Jamie Campbell-Walter in the Lister Storm, the only car from Lister in the race at the moment, between the second and fourth place Belmondo Vipers and the Dunlop tyres of the Belmondo cars, performing well in these early laps, but the general feeling is that they will start to give up performance to the Michelins, which traditionally remain much more consistent throughout their runs after 10 or so laps. But it doesn't look as though tyres are going to be what is the deciding factor here, because Jamie Campbell-Walter has got a clear speed advantage, and possibly a little bit of a handling advantage as well over those Vipers, David.
He has. You can see when he came out to that last corner, the parabolic to come onto the straight, he came out really tight. He came out round the inside, and that left him on the inside all the way up the straight until he got to the first chicane. And when you watch him around the rest of the circuit, it's the same thing. He doesn't use all the corners, all the curb, and he can make that car work so much better, look after his tyres, look after the fuel consumption, and he can still that bit quicker, and that's him now past all those Belmondo Vipers. And he's got the lead car, the Labra car driven by Christopher Bouchot, in front of him, so now he's a little bit behind that, and he's got to buckle down and concentrate on driving well, not making any mistakes, and he'll hopefully try and reel that car in, and then we can have a real battle for first, having worked his way up all the way from 13th on the grid to second in quite a short time.
One of the important things, of course, for him is not to boil the tyres now in these early laps, because if he does so, if he kills them early on, he's still got to last the best part of 50 minutes in this car on half-dead tyres, and any good work there, as you say, 13th to 2nd in the first 3 or 4 laps is some progress. Don't call this a walkover for the Lister Storm yet, though, because certainly the Labra Competition Viper is within half a second a lap or so of Jamie's speed at the moment, and they are both down under the 1 minute 50 lap times. Both Christophe Bouchot and Jamie Campbell-Walter lapping quicker than anything else on the track, and as a result, Bouchot starting to stretch away, as is Campbell-Walter now, from the trio of Belmondo Vipers. A little bit of inter-Nissan rivalry as they have swapped positions now for 3rd and 4th places. And the Ferraris, the 2 Raffinelli cars, Emanuele Naspetti dropped his car off the road in Superpole. There he is, the first of the red Ferraris. But it turns out that despite his spin out of the Parabolica, or midway through the Parabolica, he hadn't in fact flat spotted the tyres, because all the drivers nominate one set of tyres for Superpole if they happen to get in it. The drivers that use them have done 3 laps on them. The drivers that don't do Superpole have a brand new set for the race. But it does mean that if you, like Naspetti, lose the car in Superpole and really flat spot your tyres, then you're left with a real dilemma at the start of the race. Now, we've had a couple of emails in. Incidentally, if you want to contact us, the car guys, all one word, at Eurosport.com, please do so. Give us your hints, suggestions, questions or criticisms. One of them from one of our younger viewers wanted to know why David isn't driving. We'll get to that one later on, David, I think. But question here, David saying that the GT cars running a 3-hour race, perhaps a little bit much to ask them to make a special setup or use special tyres for the Superpole, and wouldn't it be better perhaps to have the Super Tourers in Superpole? Now, you've got experience of doing Superpole in Super Touring. I don't think you enjoyed it enormously, did you? No, we had to do it the same as these guys. We had to do it with cold tyres. And on some of the very short circuits we used in Britain, that was quite difficult to try and get heat into it. We would sometimes have to alter the car quite dramatically to get heat into the tyres. Here at Monza, we've got a very long circuit, and this is sufficient time to get that heat in. But you're doing a total of 1 timed lap. So you've got out lap, which is going slowly, trying to warm the tyres up. You've got 1 timed lap, and you've got in lap, which you can take at whatever pace you want. So you're not exactly wearing your tyres out before you start a major race. So I don't see any problems in using the same tyres. You're not going to go and try and do something stupid like fit on a set of qualifying tyres and do Superpole and expect to start an endurance race. We are in endurance racing, and the tyres here have got to last approximately 1 hour, which is the length of time a tank full of fuel lasts. So therefore they're going to fit on race tyres when they go out and do that Superpole, the same as they do most of the time when they're qualifying. And they're going to last that time, and as long as you don't spin, and we've seen 1 spin there, he was lucky to get away with not actually damaging the tyres. We asked the team manager, Mr. Raffinelli, and he was very pleased that the tyres came back in one piece and they weren't going to cause him a problem. And we've seen from the start of the race here, the car is working very well. Looking now at the battle for the lead of the NGT class. These cars are GT3R Porsches, by and large. With the exception of 2 Ferrari 360 Modenas, the entire class looks like this car, not in the same colours, you understand, but largely like this car. Luca Riccatelli, one of the fastest of the drivers. He was the man who took the Superpole for the NGT class, and at the moment he's deep in battle with Jürgen von Gartzen. He's in the Labra competition car. That's the red, white and black machine, and right behind him, looking for 3rd place in the class, is another of the GT3R Porsches, the 54 Art Engineering car, and that was driven in Superpole by Fabio Babini. He is the guy who started that. So don't forget, there are two races going on here, as we're used to seeing in endurance racing. The GT cars, which are effectively to GT2 specification, as was, and the GT3R Porsches and the two Ferrari 360 Modenas, which are in the NGT class. And those half dozen fastest NGT cars who shot in Superpole got a position on the top 12 on the grid. As we've seen now, the faster GT cars have worked their way through them, but the NGT battle is going to be just as ferocious this year, I'm sure, as it was last year when Christophe Bouchou won that title with the Labre competition team. And this is the Proton Engineering car in the GT class, another Porsche, so looks outwardly fairly similar, but that's a GT2 spec Porsche. And the 8th car, Proton Engineering, running it again for, not this year, Gerald Reed, but his son Christian Reed, Mauro Casadei and Luca Pazzaglia. Beautiful Monza, bathed in sunshine, the Alps in the background, the National Park at Monza, all around this historic racetrack. And from the 1920s, the banked oval circuit, and a fearsome circuit it is, to the modern Grand Prix track, so well known from your Formula One television. And here is our race leader, just some 25 minutes, 30 minutes nearly into the race. Christophe Bouchou leading from pole position in the Labre competition. Viper, oh, and drama as Bouchou miscues at the Variante Goodyear, the first chicane at the end of the long front straight, and Jamie Campbell-Walter now jumps into the lead. Now, David, Campbell-Walter snaffling the lead there from Bouchou. He was just about 2 seconds behind. Bouchou comes back in front, but Bouchou miscuing as he caught some slower traffic, and that's always a problem with the closing speeds of these faster cars on the NGT machines.
It is. Just as we caught the glimpse of the camera there, we discovered that there was some slower cars in front of him, and he's obviously locked up and missed a chicane going in. That allowed Jamie to get past him, and now they've repassed.
Christian Pescatori retiring the 62 Ferrari. Pescatori, the reigning sports racing champion. And now come to the FIA GT Championship with the JMB GS Ferraris and the JMB car that he was sharing with David Terrian. Out of the rumble, Walter leads into the first set of pit stops, but Bouchou stopping early before the Lister Storm. And this was always Lawrence Pierce's tactic. He said, we'll leave Jamie out there until the next fastest car, which they figured would be the Labre car, stops, and then we'll bring him in. And that's exactly what happened. Now, we worked out while we were doing our arithmetic that you lose over 2 minutes on a pit stop, but Jamie Campbell-Walter came out 17 seconds ahead of Christophe Bouchou's car, and Tom Coronel was in the car at that stage. Well, that was after the first pit stops. Coronel did a blinding second stint with laps down at qualifying pace for a fairly large percentage of it, to hand over the lead back to Jamie Campbell-Walter at their second stop. Campbell-Walter is now on board the car. He is currently leading the race by 28.5 seconds from Christophe Bouchou, who is now back in the Labre competition Viper. Bouchou had handed over mid-race to his teammate Jean-Philippe Belloc, and Belloc, a former driver in the Belmondo squad last year, has also done a good middle stint with that car, keeping the gap constant and certainly not being destroyed by the speed of the Lister Storm. So Lister leading. That brings us on rather nicely actually to one of our email questions. If you want to ask us what's going on, or have questions that you want to ask, the car guys at Eurosport.com. David Hodgson wants to know, David, how is it that Ferrari and Chrysler provide cars for customers, but Lister, in brackets, he says the best package, doesn't?
Well, that's the fact they do, but they don't supply to anyone in the European Championship. They have only a limited number of cars available, and those cars that they've supplied so far are in the British GT Championship and the Spanish GT Championship. So while we don't see them on this particular race, they are out there somewhere.
So Lister, you can go and get one, but it will be run by Lawrence Pierce for you. And that is very much the situation with those cars. The Vipers you can buy, of course, built by the Orica team, and then you can buy the second-hand ones as well and get them run by whoever you like. So the stage of the race at the moment with just 10 laps remaining. Jamie Campbell-Walter leading by 29.5 seconds from Christophe Bouchou. In third place, and still yet to break his gearbox, is Boris de Richebourg in the Belmondo Viper. In fourth place, Didier Defourny in the other Belmondo car, and Anthony Kumpen in fifth place. And stop-and-go penalty in the closing stages for the number 54 Art Engineering Porsche, the remaining one. We saw the sister car in the gravel traps earlier in the race. But this is Jamie Campbell-Walter now coming on to put a lap on the third-placed car. So far up the field is the Lister Storm. The Belmondo cars are third, fourth and fifth. Marc Duez, in the better placed of the Raffinelli Ferraris, is in sixth place because the second Raffinelli car has made a couple of unscheduled pit stops, and the number 5 machine, Emanuele Naspetti, now back at the wheel, is down in 23rd, mired in the NGT midfield and 2 laps off the lead. But still, Duez in the Ferrari is trying to mix it with the rest of the Vipers in the GT class. NGT being led by the number 69 Porsche. That is being run by the Rodolphe Orlando team, and the pair of drivers this weekend, Johnny Cecotto, the former World Touring Car champion and motorcycle ace, and he is sharing with Austrian Philipp Peter, who will be a regular driver in the car. The Russian TMK Porsche goes off track there. The 59 car is in 20th place at the moment as he tries to let Christophe Bouchou through and then runs out of road himself. Danger always of being too gentlemanly for the slower cars is evident there. He had plenty of runoff area though to get away with it, but it is important that the slower drivers, David, for the faster drivers' sake, stay on the racing line and don't do anything really unexpected.
It is, because if you're coming up behind someone, the last thing you want them to do is look in their mirrors and suddenly make a sharp movement. So the faster guys always at the driver's briefing say whatever the slower cars are doing, if they stick to their line, then we can work our way around them, and that is the best thing to do. Because if you've got a slower guy in front of you and he sees you behind you and he suddenly decides to shoot to the right and you've already committed yourself to the right, then you're looking for an accident. So it's always better just to let the guys have their own line, and that way you can have a really good safe race.
And then at least the safe cars, the slower cars, are predictable rather than erratic. Well, we'll be back for the highlights of the finish of the race in just a moment. Report live at Monza for the opening race in the FIA GT Championship, racing towards its conclusion. 22 minutes left in this 3-hour timed event. You're watching a Ferrari. Gabriele Raffinelli with a pair of Ferraris here, and the best placed of those in 6th place at the moment is this car, number 6, with Marc Duez, the Belgian driver, at the helm. And oil flags being shown at the Parabolica, just the place you don't want them. There's a big cloud of dust hanging in the air as well. I wonder if somebody has run wide. Now, we've had a number of emails from you. If you want to send in your messages during our weekends or at any other stage, the car guys, all one word, at Eurosport.com. And alongside me, David Leslie has had his nose buried in the rule book we've got here, because Neil Bywater wanted to know, what does the N in NGT stand for? And David, you couldn't find out, could you?
It's not in the rule book that I've just looked in, but all I can think of is that because motorsport rules are the way they are, run by the FIA, and they have a Group N championship which is throughout the world, so I can take it that the N is similar to the N that they use throughout other types of motorsport, and it's Group N, which is a more basic group, i.e. production type car that you can buy for the road, readily available all the time. Yeah,
that's a good call. I like that. I was going to suggest that you had 2 classes, GT and not GT. I think I like your rule better.
I think my one sounds a little bit better. Yours is off the cuff, not knowing what you're doing there.
Mine sounds like glib rubbish, but that's all that our viewers expect from me. So, final stages then of the race. Let's recap. This is Marc Duez in the Ferrari in 5th place now, of course, because Anthony Kumpen's engine has blown. So he has picked up 1 spot there, and I think his chances perhaps of finishing on the podium are almost nil, because there's some 3 Vipers ahead of him and the Lister Storm. I wouldn't say entirely nil with 20 minutes left to run, because anything can and often does happen in GT racing. But Marc Duez doing a good job with this car, sharing with Gunther Bleilinger. Bleilinger, the German driver, doing the middle stint, and Duez racing, rallying, rally crossing, ice racing. The Belgian driver's pretty much done everything. Well, there are the Paul Belmondo closest to the camera, discussing with his teammates, the demise of the number 10 car, and that was Claude-Yves Gosselin, who he was chatting to. Gosselin, the other driver with Anthony Kumpen of that number 10 Belmondo Viper. And they are now starting to slide down the order. And with 20 minutes left to go, I don't think they will get a GT race classification, to be honest. I think they've blown just a little too early for that. This Belmondo Viper behind Jamie Campbell-Walter, though, is really hanging on in there. So I wonder if that's the 12 car, Boris de Richebourg. For the moment, Jamie Campbell-Walter's last lap, 151.4, de Richebourg 151.5. So it may well be Boris, because he's been right behind Jamie for a couple of laps. There, Belmondo and Gosselin. Campbell-Walter comes across in front of them and in front of the Lister team. And de Richebourg is going for the unlapping manoeuvre here. And I think Jamie will let him go.
It looks very much, they've slowed down a little bit. Most of the cars have been running there in 149, 150 bracket. And all of a sudden they're doing 152s and 153s. So I would think they're all thinking that we've got 20 minutes to go. We need to conserve just a little bit of fuel, try and get to the end without another stop for a splash and dash or anything like that. So
well, yes, that's exactly right, I think, David, because fuel isn't something that we've touched on too much so far, but a number of the teams did say that because all of the running here, apart from qualifying itself, was in the rain, including the 2 test days, actually working out the fuel consumption for Monza has been a little bit of a guesstimate. It was generally accepted that cars like the Ferrari that are so new would probably be A, thirsty, and B, not entirely sure what they were doing. But certainly the first stop for the Lister and for the Belmondo cars and for the second-placed Labra competition, Chirot-sponsored Viper, were all pretty early, 20, 21, 22, 24 laps. And their second stints, they lasted right up till lap 54 to 58, so they were doing a 30-lap second stint. I think perhaps on the first stint they were just coming in early to make sure that there were no miscues with running out on the back of the circuit. And I think now they've probably got it sorted. But what we don't know, obviously, from our commentary boxes, is what answers they came up with.
Now, what happens when you come in for your first stop? Everyone takes it the cautious side and comes in a little bit early, as you said. And therefore, when they fill it up, there is a fuel meter there, and it can measure exactly how much fuel goes in. So from that first stop, we can work out, under race conditions, exactly how much fuel they're using. And from that, they'll be able to extend the centre section a little bit to try and go as long as they possibly can and use the full 100 litres that they have on board, filling that up for the last section, and then they've got to try and drive to a fuel consumption to make sure they can get it to the end of the race without coming back in again. If you can do that, then you've got a good chance of doing well. If you have to come back in for a splash and dash, it's like coming in for a 10-second stop-and-go penalty. You're going to lose so much time, and all that hard-earned work that you've done to try and keep in there and get that good position will suddenly disappear in front of you. But I noticed that the time between the leader, Campbell-Walter, and number 7, the Bouchot car that we've just seen there on TV is coming down a little bit from 28 seconds to 23 seconds. Now we've got about 17 minutes to go.
So we're going to be slightly confused here because the clock that started at the beginning of the race is counting down to the 3-hour mark, 17 minutes left on it, but our graphics saying that we are on our final lap. So Jamie Campbell-Walter, alternatively, 17 minutes from victory, or about 2 miles. We'll have to wait and see what the checkered flag man says. We've been going through the running order. Campbell-Walter still leading by 23 seconds from Christophe Bouchot, and undoubtedly, if he's aware of how far he's got to go, as in 2 or 3 laps, no wonder he was quite happy to let Boris de Richebourg go past him a couple of laps ago, and no wonder he's dropped the pace to mid-53s, whereas Bouchot is still flying around in mid-51s. Boris de Richebourg in 3rd place, unlapped himself, so the 3 podium finishers will be on the same lap, as opposed to de Richebourg in 3rd place being 1 lap down. Then Didier Defourny's car, the other Belmondo Viper that's still running, in 4th place. In 5th place, Marc Duez. 6th place now, the number 14 car we haven't talked about. That's the Rodolfo Orlando car, the second 911 GT2 car. And there is the checkered flag ready for Jamie Campbell-Walter to win the opening round of the FIA GT Championship. Well, no confusion for the team or for Jamie as he slows down under the Lister team to congratulate them and receive their congratulations from Tom Coronel. 2nd place comes out of the final corner, the Labra Competition Viper. First race for this car. They took pole, they led convincingly, and in the end, 2nd place, 23 seconds behind for Christophe Bouchot at the helm, and his teammate Jean-Philippe Belloc Boris de Richebourg will take third place. There is Tom Coronel with the Lister mechanics and his teammate Jamie Campbell-Walter. So in the end, no chance of miscues over the fuel. They managed to get it safely to the end. And mark one down in the book for Lister. Well, disappointment clearly for Julian Bailey in the background there. There he is in the jeans and the t-shirt, who would have shared the number 2 car with Nicholas Springer had it been able to take the start. But convincing performance from Lister and worrying for the rest of them. All right, Monza is a very different track to most others, as we see the blown tyre in the final corner drama there for the Perspective racing car of Thierry Perrier and Michel Neugarten. Well, that won't distract them too much. Neugarten still taking third place in the NGT class. So blown tyre are not coming out of the parabolica on the last lap. He kept it together. If it hadn't been the last lap, though, David, don't think he would have been on the podium.
No, he wouldn't have made it around another lap. With a tyre like that, when it's that badly blown, it was just about hanging off the wheel rim, and it would have come off in a very short distance.
There would have been very little Porsche to drive round by halfway around Monza. So NGT then falling to the number 69 car, and that will be Johnny Cecotto and Philippe Pater on the top step of the podium. Mark Duez stopping for what, a Belgian flag, or just a quick word with a friendly marshal?
No, he's picked someone up because there's somebody else inside that car. There's now 2 people inside there, so I'm not sure who stopped to pick up, but there's certainly someone else. Maybe his teammate stopped on the other side of the circuit. He stopped to pick him up. I'm not sure, but there's definitely 2 people inside that car somewhere. I
was going to suggest that perhaps there might be another itinerant Belgian hanging around. I can't think of any that... well, Anthony Kumpen blew up, but was that just Anthony Kumpen, the Belgian driving the Belmondo car? Was that where that had been? That may well have been, I suppose. Jamie Campbell-Walter...
All the Porsches, they're quite behind, so I tried to make a gap in the beginning, but it's a long race. Everything can happen, so we will see.
3-hour race in prospect, and awful conditions. Likewise, the skies leaden, and snow and rain have swept through the Czech Republic on Friday, Saturday and on Sunday. So why should Monday be any different? Indeed, the weather forecasters are suggesting it won't. Emmanuel Clerico was the man who got pole in Super Pole. Kumpen starts that car. Bouchou and Belloc start second. Voss and de Richebourg third. And the fastest of the NGT cars, qualified by the Czech Thomas Enger, fresh from third in the San Marino round of the Formula 3000 Championship, is fourth for a long time on top of Super Pole. And David Leslie alongside me. David, a lot of the reason for that was simply the conditions.
Yes, it changed very dramatically yesterday. When they went out the start, these NGT cars had the best of the circuit. They were quite dry out there, and as the practice went along, it just got wetter and wetter. And as we see today, it's the same. We're starting in these wet, drizzly conditions. It looks as though it's not too bad. It could dry out depending on what the clouds are doing up above us, but we'll have to just wait and see exactly what happens.
Well, we saw through the course of Sunday, the practice day, that it would get wet and dry, snow, rain, all sorts, and that's going to make this race a real lottery, which may play into the hands of some of the less fancied runners if the faster cars perhaps miscue coming in for a pit stop and taking on a change of tyres to suit conditions, which may then immediately change on them. We'll have to wait and see. Starting lineup then with the Belmondo Viper on pole, Clerico doing the qualifying, Kumpen starting, and the Bouchou will be starting the Labre competition car beside it. Vincent Voss starts in his car, Thomas Enger alongside in fourth place, and then the second of the Belmondo cars, and the RWS Motorsport second in the NGT class. Then the Labre Porsche, Patrice Gousselard, Sebastian Dumez. Dumez dropped it in the gravel. That wasn't him that went off in Super Pole, was it? Ahead of the Lister. Then the J&B Racing Ferrari, ahead of the second Lister, which Julian Bailey will start. Then the second of the Labre Porsches, Bruno Eichmann and Jürgen von Gartzen, heading up the next row of the grid. Hazemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen sharing the faster of the Car Sport Holland cars, ahead of the better of the pair of Raffinelli Ferraris, which line up in 7th and 8th rows of the grid. And looking further down then, still plenty of Viper interest behind the NGT cars, as you can see, as well as the Ferraris and the Listers. So those NGT cars on the first and second and third rows of the grid are certainly going to have their work cut out for them. 69 is one of our camera cars, Johnny Cecotto and Chiesa. Steve O'Rourke and Tim Sugden start right behind them in the MK car. And from then on down, it's the NGT Porsches, and we will see at the bottom of the grid the father and son combination, Franz and Nico V in their Ferrari, finally getting the car running, but not running that quickly. Neither is the second Car Sport Viper of the father and son Bleekemolen combination. Well, we'll be back in just a moment with the start of the FIA race. Join us for that in a second. Eurosport's Super Racing weekend action from Brno in the Czech Republic, starting with the beginning of the FIA GT race, and the poleman, Anthony Kumpen, flying away from the rolling start as his Viper sends up the first of many rooster tails of spray. Not raining heavily, but snowflakes on the windscreens on the warm-up lap tell you just how cold conditions are. They had real trouble getting heat into the tyres in the Super Pole and in qualifying, even when it was dry, and the air temperature 4 degrees, track temperature 2 degrees, according to the start line gantry. And the Belmondo Vipers, first and second, that's Kumpen in 11 and Vincent Vos in the number 12 car. Right behind them, the Bouchou Labre competition car, the white, red and black striped car there, and Christophe Bouchou fishtailing around. David, cold tyres, no tyre warmers, a rolling start at very low pace behind the pace car, and that means that they're going to be in real trouble with grip in these early moments.
As I was trying to say, the drivers are having great difficulty getting their tyres warm. They're going out there and it's just so cold that they're spending 3 to 4 laps before they get any heat into their tyres whatsoever. So it's taking quite a long time. So you see the car slipping slightly around on this first lap. They really are taking it very easy just to try and get around these few laps before they get some sort of heat into it and settle down into this 3-hour-long race.
Well, of course, settling down is the most important part. Qualifying and Super Pole, all very well, but what really matters is the race, and survival, I think, is going to be high on everybody's agenda in these opening laps. I don't expect too many heroics, and certainly Bouchou being very tentative indeed. Well, the sound we're getting, as you see, doesn't quite tally with Christophe Bouchou's actions, and somebody coming down the inside. That's the Car Sport Holland car, takes a pass on Bouchou. Well, he was way away from the apex of the corner there. Christophe, it can't be surely, David, do you think that he started on slicks? He's going quickly, but not as quickly as anybody else. He's just been passed, I think, by the Lister as well.
No, I think he's out there just taking it nice and easy. He's realised that they went extremely well at Monza there, so he wants to make sure he finishes this race and gets himself a lot more points, and the last thing he wants to do is take any risks whatsoever.
Well, the Car Sport Holland car going very quickly indeed. It's gone past Marc Duez in the red Ferrari, and he's now up to third place. Bouchou's also been passed by the Lister, and at the moment the NGT cars are queuing up to get past the Viper. So Bouchou being, well, circumspect in a way that I really have not seen him ever be quite so circumspect. He's being slow rather than steady. However, it is a 3-hour race, and that's the most important part, is what happens in the final 3 minutes, not the first 3 minutes. Now, the Car Sport Holland Vipers, Mike Hazeman starting that one, and he was on 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13th on the grid, currently shown in third place. So that's a reasonable start, I think you'd have to say, by Hazeman's, to pick up those many places in appalling conditions. Not even in long straights like Monza, but on what is basically a fairly medium and slow-speed track. That's great opening driving.
I think it is. What he seems to have here is a car that's set up very different to the other Vipers around him, and he's certainly ploughing his way through this field in leaps and bounds through all these other cars. You can see the cars moving around. Thomas Enger there with a Coca-Cola car, number 65, and that's a GT car, NGT car, up there mixing it with the best of the GT cars. So these cars are all slipping, sliding around, and having all that 700 plus horsepower under your right foot maybe isn't a lot of use to you in these particular weather conditions.
Ignore the noises you're hearing. These noises are from the Lister of Jamie Campbell-Walter, which was a couple of corners ahead of the Labre car, as you can hear being passed here by the 77 car. The engine noise is definitely not bearing much relation to what's going on in the pictures. But the Labre competition car being dropped down the order, and he will be out of the top 10 within a couple more moments. Of course, Thomas Enger there in the Coca-Cola car has the big advantage of being a native of the Czech Republic, and so he knows this track very well. He's done a lot of racing here, and I'm sure he will have done a lot in the rain as well. So not only is he not having to learn the circuit, but he's not having to learn the vagaries of the weather here either. And the other advantage that he's got in the NGT car over the Vipers is, of course, that he's not trying to put so much horsepower down through the rear wheels, and that just helps. The more horsepower you get, the more wheel spin you've got. Now, around the outside for second, another good move by the Car Sport Holland driver. In fact, is that for the lead? Yeah, David's holding up one finger. It is for the lead. That is the leader then from 13th on the grid in 3 laps. Now, that is pretty impressive by anybody's stretch of the imagination. That's how they were as they crossed the line. Kumpana has been passed by Hasemans. Vos still third, and in 4th place is Jamie Campbell-Walter. He too is closing on these Dunlop Schuld Paul Belmondo Racing Vipers that were first and second. Now, interesting that the Car Sport Holland guys had problems at Monza because they have done so many modifications to their car. One of them was moving the oil tank for the dry sump engine right to the back of the car. And basically, the travel on the pipes was just too long. The pumps couldn't cope, and they ran their engines dry, destroyed £75,000 worth of engines in, well, not even 75 minutes worth of running. 3 engines gone over the weekend. But among the other things they've done is obviously, David, some fairly strong aero work, because that car is working very strongly indeed, as we see one of the Ferraris coming into the pits. And that, I think, will be the second of the Raffinelli cars.
Yes, the Hazelman car has done a lot of work to that car to try and make it better. They've certainly done all sorts of modifications. So it's working extremely well for them. They're gone from 13th on the grid all the way up to the lead, and they're making very best use. We can see the yellow flags there. There's somebody off on the right-hand side getting towed away.
Yeah, one of the NGT Porsches has gone off there. So just proving how tricky it still is. Now, a number of the Porsches further back down the field are driven by what you would definitely refer to as gentleman drivers. Gentlemen in their track manners, hopefully, as well as in their nature of largely paying for their own driving. Most of the front runners, though, David, professional drivers, and some of them with some fairly illustrious backgrounds. Some ex-Formula 1 drivers in the GT field, as well as in the Super Touring and Super Production. Some of these guys have got a lot of sports car racing under their belt, among which, just moving up into 3rd place at the back of the shot, Jamie Campbell-Walter. He shared last year the #1 Lister Storm with Julian Bailey, and Bailey is driving the #2 car. Bailey starting right at the back of the field, incidentally, because he wasn't on the rolling grid, and that was a problem for the Lister team, getting caught as the pit lane closed. Julian Bailey was still in the pits, but he is running, unlike Monza, where he took the rolling start and then peeled in at the end of the first lap with a chronic misfire. The problems in Monza, Lister have traced down to muck in the fuel, which was blocking the injectors of Jamie Campbell-Walter's car in qualifying, and Julian Bailey's for the race. No reoccurrence of those. No reoccurrence of the oil tank problems either for the Hasemans Viper. And, well, we saw this car go right to Magny-Cours, the final race of last year's championship, with a chance of defeating the Lister. And it looks as though this may be another season-long battle between the lead Car Sport Holland machine and the Lister Storms. Different format to the 2 cars, of course. They're both front-engined, 8-litre V10 in the Viper and the V12 Jaguar engine in the front of the Lister Storm. And, well, Jamie had got past on the straight, but perhaps just getting his nose in front, he decided that discretion was the better part of valour in that battle for 3rd place going into the first corner. The Belmondo team preparing the pit boards. On board now with Jamie Campbell-Walter, and that's a mixture of rain and snow, isn't it, David? There's some very, very fat raindrops they have in the Czech Republic otherwise.
Yes, it is. You can see it's coming down quite hard at the moment onto the screen. These cars quite often have only got one wiper, and the wiper's in front of the driver, and the camera we're looking through is in the passenger seat, or where the passenger seat would be. So therefore the screen is not getting white for us, but we can see it's coming down quite heavy now. Certainly a lot wetter now than it was when the race started. So the conditions look as though they're going to get worse rather than better as the race progresses.
I don't think that there would have been any gambling on slicks at the start of the race. The track was pretty wet, and what's more, the skies looked like it was likely to remain that way. The car of Thomas Enger, 65, now once more under pressure from Christophe Bouchou. I really can't believe it's taken Bouchou that long to come in. Maybe he has had his car set up for drying conditions and is just floundering in what are fairly wet conditions. We'll have to wait and see how he progresses. Jamie, again, not really pushing the issue too much about this third position. He can see quite clearly, as we can, that he and Vincent Voss are both reeling in the number 11 car, the front car in this picture. That's Anthony Kumpen, who is in second place. So Jamie, if he bides his time, might be in a position in 2 laps' time or so, as he comes onto the main straight, to pick up both second and third places in one fell swoop. As it is, they're catching the second place man, but that little group not catching this car. Mike Hazeman's driving away from them.
This car certainly had a lot of, I tried to say before, had a lot of work done to it. Whatever it is they've done, it's certainly working extremely well, because now after only 4 laps they're some 8 seconds ahead of Kumpen and Voss, with Jamie Campbell-Walter and the winning car from last time out at Monza back in 4th position. We know at the start of the race last time Jamie started well back, and it didn't take him very long to get back right to the very front, but this time in these weather conditions it's taking him that little bit longer, and certainly the Hazelman car at the front is stretching its lead lap by lap by quite a bit.
Well, Jamie was saying on Sunday rather, during qualifying, that the problem in the wet conditions, the colder it gets, the wetter it gets for the Lister, is heat in the tyres. He said the being generally a softer sprung car tend to roll a little more on their tyres. That's very bad news when it's really hot, because it tends to burn them up. But in cold conditions, it just helps keep the average temperature a little higher than the Lister's, which is the Lister is a much more stiffly sprung race car, much more developed perhaps even than the Viper. The Viper now familiar sight for the better part of a decade on the racetrack, since they first brought the car out as a GT1 machine, and then put it back into the GT2 class, where instead of getting trounced regularly, it became the benchmark, and the Lister Storm really the only constant rival to that car over the last 5 or 6 years. We've seen things like Coroyzer's Marcus Ellen 600, but because he's moved the gearbox from its normal position attached to the front-mounted engine, so being a transaxle effectively with the gearbox attached to the axle at the rear, that's not eligible for the FIA races, for the Le Mans series, or for the Le Mans 24 Hours itself. Now, we had an email in from Jeff Graham, wanted to know the story behind Julian Bailey and the Lister team, because Julian Bailey was originally not down to drive for the Lister team, and it was only pretty much at the 11th hour that he was called in to partner the number 2 car with Nicolas Springer. I have to say, Graham, I'm afraid we're not going to go there. Nobody is spilling the beans on the full story. I know that Julian was disappointed as the champion not to be asked back by Lawrence Pierce until the closing moments of the pre-season were over, but I'm sure that Lawrence is glad to have somebody, not only of Julian's ability, but of his experience with the Lister Storm, that he could call on to drive the car. And I believe that Julian will be alongside Nicolas Springer all season, as the number 1 combination of Campbell-Walter and Tom Coronel should be fairly much a constant. Coronel does have a previous commitment to Dutch touring cars, which has taken him away from us this weekend, but Richard Dean, who will share the car with Jamie Campbell-Walter, is a long-time backup driver of Lister and has raced for Lister in the British and the FIA championships. Well, the onboard, and particularly the noises there that you could pick up coming from Thomas Enger's Porsche, David, showing that the NGT cars aren't having it all their own way in terms of grip either. That was, he was being a bit gentle with the throttle, or not gentle, but certainly tentative with the throttle.
Yeah, these cars, rear engine, rear wheel drive, a lot of weight at the back of these cars, and they do tend to slide around a bit. We've seen it earlier, one of the pictures with Thomas Enger going around the corner, the amount of oversteer drifting that they have with the rear of these cars. And we can see the top 3 cars here, all out, nose to tail, so this is a really good battle for the NGT class lead.
The Art Engineering car in second place, really giving Enger something to think about, and the RWS car, the 77 car, in third spot as well. That's been started by Luca Riccatelli, and in the first of the art engineering cars is Fabio Babini. Now, he was in the Superpole runoffs at Monza as well. And is that sunshine? I'm not sure I recognise the track under those conditions. The sun is starting to break through, and it does look as though the rain and the snow have pretty much abated. Now, I wonder whether we will see a start of a charge from Christophe Bouchou if the track conditions start to come back. I really do feel that perhaps the Chirot car has been set up, the Chirot Viper has been set up for drying conditions. And with, well, I don't know what weather forecast they read, but with the weather forecast that have been generally over the weekend, I would think that's slightly optimistic.
Yeah, the weather is still a bit overcast, but it does look an awful lot brighter than it did before. I don't know, I would think that these people will be biting their nails, looking at the sky at the moment, working out what to do. A 3-hour race, they normally stop around about the first hour and the second hour on the hour somewhere, and then decide what to do at that point, change drivers or leave the driver in, change tyres, etc. But if they feel it's going to dry, and it looks at the moment as though it is going to dry, then they may have to bring them in a little bit earlier, because if it does dry out, these wet tyres they've got on there at the moment are not going to last very long at all. So all these team managers standing on the pit wall, I'm sure, are looking at the sky to work out what to do. But I can see them doing a lot of worrying at the moment.
Anthony Kumpen given a stop-and-go penalty, and that will be, I would think, for jumping the start, David. He was certainly rolling very well ahead of the field. Now, as the poleman, it's his prerogative to go when he wants to, except that, as the safety car pulled off, he should really have waited for the red lights to go off before the race was declared live, and clearly, in the estimation of the stewards, if not of Monsieur Kumpen himself, he didn't.
It certainly looked at the start, he just took off when everybody else was still sitting there waiting to work out what to do. Yes, once the pace car pulls off, it's up to the poleman to take charge, but they should still remain at a slow speed until those red lights are turned to green, and at that point they should start to accelerate. Normally that doesn't happen until the cars are very close to the light. That simply didn't happen there, and Kumpen just took off and had a big lead when he got to the first corner.
Well, Jamie Campbell-Walter in the Lister Storm in second place by 7.6 seconds. Last graphic we saw, he was behind those two Vipers there, and he was 9.8 behind. So not only has he picked up those two places, but as conditions have got better, he's picked up some speed as well. The 21 car, the Racing Box, GLPK Viper rather, Wim Deens, the Belgian, starting that car here. Don't forget that car was too badly damaged in practice at Monza to start the race, and he's got a battle on his hands there with the three NGT class leaders. Jamie Campbell-Walter now homing in on Mike Hazelman's out front with just 7 laps gone. Vincent Vos and Anthony Kumpen third and fourth, and Kumpen and Duez, Naspetti and Duez in the Ferraris 5th and 6th, ahead of Bouchou, Didier Defourny in the third of the Belmondo cars, then Jean-Pierre Jarier in the French Championship winning Viper that we saw for the first time in the FIA series at Magny-Cours last year. And Jarier, well, he's got Francois Lafon as his teammate, who will be steady during the middle stint. I would imagine that Jarier will take the car as long as he possibly can on fuel, and then get back into it as early as he possibly can, with Lafon doing the pure minimum here, particularly in these conditions, because, David, for a gentleman who is an enthusiast driver as opposed to a hardened professional, these are very, very tricky conditions indeed.
They are indeed. A lot of these cars out here, especially in the NGT class, have got one, shall we say, professional driver and one gentleman driver. And these gentleman drivers do not relish driving in these conditions. They're here to have some really nice time, and they like nice sunny circuits, and they go out there with lovely cars, and they have a nice time. Now, that's not happening here at Brno. These conditions are making life very difficult for them. So what they're going to do is they're going to do the absolute minimum, as Martin said. So the professional driver will go out and start there. He'll run as long as he can. So if the car will run, say, for an hour, over an hour and 10, hour and 20 minutes, they'll do that. And then they'll bring the car in, maybe a 50-minute stint in the middle for the gentleman driver, bring it back in, put the professional driver back in to finish it off. And that way they'll try and get the best. Because these professional drivers, while they enjoy their racing tremendously, they're not always the quickest people out there.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that they are very worried, generally, about getting in the way of the fast cars and ruining the race for everybody else, and that's something none of them will want to know about. Now, we mentioned Julian Bailey's car was caught in the pits at the start. Let's hear the reason now from his co-driver, Nicholas Springer.
Julian started in the car from pit lane. What was the problem exactly?
There was a slight mistake in the timekeeping, and the pit lane was suddenly closed, so we started from the pit lane.
Nothing more serious than that, no mechanical problem, just the problem that you were late?
No, nothing serious, nothing. It was just timekeeping error, and that was it. That's racing.
Thank you.
Or in fact, that's starting from the pit lane, as the case may be. So Nicholas Springer will take over in the middle. And you mentioned if you can get the car to go an hour and 10, an hour and 20. We thought that if the race had been a real hot contest in Monza, that all the teams, well, they were saying privately that they would have been very carefully watching the fuel gauges right towards the end of the Monza race. In these conditions, though, David, you're using part throttle a lot more. You're not really nailing the car out of the corners, and that means presumably that the fuel will go a lot longer, and we probably won't see anybody needing fuel before the hour mark, and quite possibly longer. So I don't think fuel is going to be much of an issue in this race, is it?
No, certainly not in these conditions. These conditions mean, as you said, a lot of part throttle, and it's a full throttle position that uses all the fuel in these cars. So while along the straight, yes, you can get that full throttle on, but during the majority of this twisty 5-kilometre circuit, there's going to be a lot of part throttle positions, and fuel just simply won't be an issue. They're going to have so much fuel left at the end of the 3-hour race compared to what they normally have, that some of that strategy and how quick can they do the pit stops and various things like this will come into play as the race progresses.
Jamie Campbell-Walter's strategy including cruising under the pit wall, or not cruising but racing under the pit wall there, desperately searching out the wettest parts of the track to keep these tyres alive. The real pit stop strategy, of course, will likely be determined by what the weather is doing, because as David mentioned earlier, if it gets dry, these wet weather tyres will be destroyed in a very short stretch of time. And the drivers now trying desperately to stay on the wet part of the track. That is helping the tyres remain cool, and it's stopping the edges of the tread blocks from being destroyed. And the problem is, not only is there less rubber on the road because of the grooves in the middle of the tyres, so the actual contact patch is smaller with a wet weather tyre than with a dry weather tyre, so the absolute grip level in the dry goes down, even though the compound is softer. The real problem then occurs is, suddenly if it rains, you've got pretty much bald tyres again, and they do about as much for you as a slick. Now, it is clearly getting dry. You can see Mike Hazelman's here weaving around in a manner that he would not normally approve of, and Jamie Campbell-Walter doing the same. Let's have a look on the windscreen. Well, the odd spit and spot, but probably half of those still hanging in the air from the progress of the Viper.
Yeah, the windscreen's still dirty from what he's been following and passing cars, etc., but there's very little in the way of snow and rain coming down here at the moment. So it certainly looks as though it's going to get a lot drier than it has been. And as we said, the minute it gets drier, those nice soft wet tyres, they're going to move around on those blocks that are cut into the tyre, and the minute they start doing that, they will lose grip and start to disintegrate. So maybe they have to come in early for slick tyres if it dries out even more.
It's a vicious circle as well, of course, because the more you start to lose the grip, the more the car slides around and the tyres get dug to bits, and the more they get dug to bits, the less grip you have, and so on and so on and so on. Again, both of them right up by the pit wall, looking for that water. There's a good shot from Jamie's car as he comes back onto the racing line. Now, preservation of the tyre is more important than a couple of tenths of a second per lap, and since Hazelman's is doing exactly the same, they're pretty much running at the same pace. Some parts of the track, David, still streaming wet. You can see big rooster tails there, but then again he comes down into the braking area where he's back online and no spray at all. So it's working, keeping their tyres alive, but whether they can continue to do this for another 45 or 50 minutes until they get to the sort of pit window they want remains to be seen. Well, we're going to take a short commercial break in a moment. Mike Hazelman's losing time all the time to Jamie Campbell-Walter for the lead of this race. And is that a Ferrari in third place now? No, Vincent Voss is in third place, so that in fact is the Vif Ferrari, which has been lapped. The Naspetti and Duez cars in 5th and 6th. Stay with us for the Super Racing Weekend. Welcome back to the Super Racing Weekends. We're at Brno in the Czech Republic, round 2 of the FIA GT Championship, and Well, just look at the way the weather has changed through the portion of the race. The main middle section of the race saw it dry right out, then another couple of rain and snowstorms. It dried out again, and then back to wet weather. Mike Hazeman's in your own Bleekemolen's Carsport Holland car has led almost all the way. Wout van Vos and Boris de Richebourg, Paul Belmondo, and the Racing's Didier Deforny and Emmanuel Clerico, from Christophe Bouchou and Jean-Philippe Belloc in the Labre competition car. And then Jamie Campbell-Walter is currently lying in 5th position, having taken back the Lister Storm from Richard Dean for this closing stint. We are trying to get some graphics on screen for you from the Czech Republic. Your own Bleekemolen in the number 3 Carsport Holland machine is your race leader. Mike Hazeman's doing a good, strong job with that car. And David, the sky is still very, very threatening, even though it looks to be an awful lot drier now. Actually, on the racetrack, there's very little in the way of spray.
Yes, you can see the sprays disappeared altogether. In the middle section, it really did pour down with rain. And these guys are all sticking to their wet tyres. But as you can see, it's drying out all the time. The spray's almost disappeared completely. And these guys are getting down to trying to do a good job. But as you see, they're trying to move over to whatever wet part of the circuit, whatever damp part. You can even see it nearly drying out on the racing line to have an actual dry line. And that's one thing that these guys don't really want at the moment with their wet tyres.
Well, they're coming up behind the second of the Lister Storms. That's Nicholas Springer's car. And he is currently down in 10th position. And that, in fact, is behind the lead NGT car, as well as most of the GTs. The lead NGT car is David Terrian and Christian Pescatori's Ferrari. Now, only one of the JMB competition Ferraris here this weekend, but going very well indeed, and at the moment going better than any of the Porsches. So the NGT leader, the first time this season at least, is the Ferrari. But still the Hazeman's car is out front, and I would venture that it's Nicholas Springer probably still at the wheel of the Lister, in for what will surely be his final pit stop, unless the weather really goes horribly wrong, is Jeroen Bleekemolen. 3 Bleekemolens in the competition. His father Michael sharing the other Carsport Holland with his older brother. And David peering as the cameraman follows the drivers. We don't want him to do that. That's what we want to see. They are changing tyres. Nobody changed tyres in their first pit stops, which came after around an hour and 10, an hour and 15 minutes of racing. Intermediates, David.
Yes, they look as though they're going to put these intermediates. This is a tyre halfway between a slick and a wet, and it will work very nicely on this drying circuit. We've got 2 hours and 25 minutes of the race gone, so we've got some 35 minutes of the race left. Off comes that wet. That was a wet tyre that came off. On goes the intermediate. They're banking on it not drying out fully, so they're going to go for the safety of having intermediate rather than taking a big gamble and putting a slick on. I can see some of the teams further down this field taking that gamble and putting a slick on a basis that on the last sort of 10-15 minutes it'll be really dry, and then they can make a real move forward with the grip that they'll have with the slick tyres. But there we are, as fast as possible. Once the fuel's in, then they can start and change the tyre. So when the fuel man comes off, they'll jack the car up, take the wheels off. They're only allowed 2 people to do that on the car, 1 on either side, so you can see them running from the back wheel to the front wheel and vice versa. There he is, all 4 wheels changed, now on to intermediate. So the lap times will start to tumble at this point, and we'll see just how fast this car goes. But it'll be interesting now to find out who else is going to come in and exactly what tyres they're going to put on. Here we see the Labre car, which was really struggling at the beginning of this race. I don't know why, but it must have been on a very different suspension setting, and it was slipping and sliding around and dropped way down the field to about 8th position.
Well, again, the chances possibly that they might have gambled on things not getting so wet and possibly started on intermediates. But David, even that brief shot we saw of the Carsport's tyres, I thought those wets, considering they've been on the car now for the better part of 2 hours, or in fact over 2 hours, were in remarkably good condition.
Yes, they were. It just shows how much rain and how wet it actually was out there. Well, we didn't think it was terribly wet at the beginning of the race. Obviously, in the centre section, it was lashing it down with rain. But they've managed to preserve them by moving over off that racing line onto the wet bit. And you can see quite often all the way around this circuit, that the people will move away off the racing line, or suddenly, because they're in the middle of the road instead of where you would expect them to be at the edge of the road, to try and keep those tyres in as good a condition as possible, to try and get as far through the race as possible in order to make a decision as late as possible to find out what to do for the last stint.
Now, depends really what the stopwatch tells us, but if the weather is starting to clear away and the sky looks as though it may have enough blue patches in, I'm sure we will see some gambling on slicks. And one of those, I would have to say, I bet you, is going to be Julian Bailey, down in the bottom end of the top 10, and not where he would like to be. And if there's any chance of turning this race around for Julian, it'll be to take slicks and to try and live with it. They'll see, I'm sure, what the car sport machine is doing in terms of lap times after a couple of laps out on the track. Jeroen Bleekemolen did a good job in the middle to hold on to the race lead. Let's hear from him now.
What happened exactly?
Yeah, we had to come in because we had no fuel anymore, and also the tires were completely gone, so we had to come in. But I think Mike is going to go quick, so now, yeah, maybe he can win it.
You're confident that it won't just be a podium, it will be a victory?
Yeah, well, it was difficult to drive because, yeah, the tires were rain tires. It was almost dry, but in the end it was okay, but it was very difficult. It was my first long-distance race, so it was really, yeah, it was really difficult for me, but okay.
Well done anyway, thank you, Joe.
Yeah, well done indeed to young Jeroen Bleekemolen. He is, as he says, in his first long-distance race, because the cars didn't make it into Monza, and his previous experience up to this stage, well, it's been nothing more tremendous than a 20-lapper in Formula 3, so it's a very, very different kettle of fish. Jean-Philippe Belloc, then, in the Labre competition car, is the new leader. Don't quite see how that will have happened unless both of the Belmondo racing cars are in the pits, and we didn't see that. They may be, but we haven't seen them come in yet. Right behind him is Jamie Campbell-Walter and Richard Dean's Lister Storm. Now, the Labre competition car, if we get to see them, still squirreling around there as he's trying to unleash all of that horsepower. Jean-Philippe Belloc and Boris de Richebourg still being shown as first and second. And yes, David pointing out that Richard Dean has dived into the pits. Now, the Viper, the Lister Storm, I beg your pardon, went an hour and 10 minutes on its first tank. It's now done 1 hour on its second tank, and there are 50 minutes left to go. That sounds like time to get Jamie Campbell-Walter in the car, and I'm sure that Richard Dean was pretty much out of tyres as well by that stage. So at the moment, it's the 12 and 11 Belmondo cars first and second. Jean-Philippe Belloc third place here, and the Lister Storm has dived into the pits. Jean-Philippe Belloc continuing in the middle stint for Labre competition. Christophe Bouchou will take over at the end. Bouchou didn't take tyres for the pit stop either, or the car didn't take tyres for the pit stop either. So for the first pit stop, and so they, like everybody else, still struggling along on their wet tyres. And I'm sure during the middle stint, all those drivers who didn't have the wet tyres taken off and maybe intermediates put on were pretty darn glad of it, David. Intermediates were not the thing to have in all that rain and snow.
Certainly not. It just, the skies opened and down came the rain in the centre section, and you definitely needed the rain tyres. But as the race is progressing now, we're discovering, we can see on the circuit, you can see the lighter coloured patches of the tarmac on the circuit. That's a dry part of the circuit. And those with the intermediates, the first one we've seen, Hazelman going out there with his intermediates, he'll be on those dry patches all the time. And the rest of the people, they'll try and run across them and use them a little bit in the corners, but certainly down the straights they'll pull off line and try and keep the tyres as cool as possible. So we can see the Labre car there using round the corners and then immediately moving off line to try and get a wet line back onto the dry line for the corners. But all the time this circuit is getting drier and drier by the second.
Certainly is, and that means that it's more and more destructive to the wet weather tyres, and more likely that everybody will take some kind of slick compound tyre, whether it's a full slick or they're an intermediate, which is essentially a slick compound, but with grooves cut in just to move away that last little bit of water. So the Vipers continue out front. The Lister Storm has been in and out of the pits. We've had a number of people asking about the Lister Storm. Questions generally around, why don't we see it at Le Mans? Why don't we see it in the American Le Mans series? Well, the simple fact of the matter is it's racing in the FIA GT series under special dispensation. It's a little bit of a historic anomaly, in fact, the Lister Storm's participation here. It's not allowed to race in the American Le Mans Series, and we had another question as to why the Carsport Holland cars weren't at Donington Park in the European Le Mans race. Well, that's because they would have missed qualifying in the Czech Republic, and the FIA GT Championship is their first priority. An occasional European Le Mans race, if it doesn't clash, will be their second. 28 minutes and counting in this race, well past the 2-hour mark, and now into the closing stages. Race started at 22:12 Central European time, so we're into the last half hour.
It's unusual for these cars to go this actual distance without coming into the pits for their last pit stop. Normally they can do an hour and 5 minutes, and that gives them just enough time to get to the finish without having to refuel. That certainly happened in Monza, and they were right on the empty as they finished the race there. But here with these conditions, because they're not using as much fuel at all, then they've been able to stretch the first pit stop to something like an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes, which means the second one's around about the 2.5 hours, which is where we are now. So we've seen the first of the cars, the Hazelman car, in there, and we've seen the Lister car diving into the pit, so it's changed, but we didn't see, in actual fact, what tyres actually went onto that Lister car. So we're not sure exactly what Jamie's out there at the moment, but certainly I would think anyone further back from the lead would be more likely to take that risk and fit slicks in order to get that best.
Well, here's the current classification then. Our timing and scoring monitor is showing the Hazelman's car as the leader, but it's Belloc de Richebourg Hazelman's with Campbell Walter next up. Mimo Schiattarella in the Ferrari in 5th place, and the second Ferrari is in 6th position. It's the guys in the most powerful cars who have had most of the struggle. In the pits are race leader Vincent Vos and Boris de Richebourg's number 12 Belmondo Racing Viper. David trying to glean some information from what's written on the sidewalls of the Dunlop tyres. And it looks as though the pits might start to become a busy place. Because of the wet weather, the car's going minimum of an hour and 10 minutes in their first stint, and even longer in the even worse conditions of the second part of the race, which takes them not to normally just before the 2-hour mark, which is where you'd expect to see them make their final change, but well into nearly 2.5 hours into this race. And that means that the short final stint is almost certain to be on different tyres, and that will give the drivers who do the final stint a chance perhaps to race in good conditions. Tamas Ilias in 6th place in his Viper, and that's a very good showing so far from those guys. This is the Labra competition car. It's been hit by stones that somebody's thrown up, broken windscreen with a little bit of sun glare. Doesn't help much, does it, when you're driving?
Not at all. It's you want the least sun possible to be able to see out, especially in these conditions when it's been wet and it's now drying. What I just can't quite understand at the moment is the circuit is drying hard all the time, and this wiper is still going on this Labra car, and everybody else has switched their wipers off, and I'm not sure, maybe the switch is broken or something, and that's why it's still running. But that can't be helping his viewing out of there, because that keeps on going, and it'll keep on scratching the window and make life a little bit more difficult for him to see out of there.
And we saw quite clearly, or we heard quite clearly, in fact, during the Carsport Holland car, the squeaking of the wiper on the windscreen. Now, that's over the sound of the racing, so you can tell just how much the wipers are really suffering in those conditions. There you are, Tupney Halfpenny switch probably coming off in his hands there and rolling around on the cockpit floor at the moment, I should think. So I'm sure that Jean-Philippe Belloc will not particularly need the wiper. Nobody else seems to. Well, the car's looking much more stable than we've seen them, I think, at really any time over the weekend, David, and almost getting to a stage where you could pretty much say there's reasonable grip all the way around.
This is something that they've not been used to this weekend at all. They've managed to have one dry session when they arrived there, and that's all. And since then we've had the snow and we've had the rain, and we've had even more snow. But so these cars will really be not what they were expecting. They didn't get a good dry setup on most of the cars. They just had that one-hour session very early on, and the rest of the time they've been trying to set the car up for the damp and wet conditions. So a lot of these cars will not be as they would expect them for a completely dry race, but nevertheless, having only some 20-odd minutes left of this race, they're well settled into it. They should be very used to it by now. The majority of the people should have been into the pits or are in the pits to have their last pit stop get those tyres changed either to the intermediates or into the slicks.
Number 12 machine is still in the pits. There you can see our NGT leader, the JMB competition Ferrari. We saw the Belmondo car in the pits, and it's still there, so if they're having trouble maybe getting it restarted under its own power, maybe having the wiper and lights on all the way through the races, overcome what feeble alternator is usually supplied to keep the battery charged up. These cars must start under their own power as part of the Le Mans regulations. Well, we see that the Hazeman's car is still leading. And good onboard camera shot here, showing that although it is a little bit grey and damp, you wouldn't want to make too many passing places offline. The Ferrari finding plenty of traction. Gunther Bleilinger showing this car with the Belgian Marc Duez. And they've got a crack in their windscreen as well, so clearly in the wet conditions, a few cars going off, chucking gravel onto the track, and that has been thrown up and broken windscreens. And the number 6 car, I'm afraid I can't tell you where the positions are at the moment because our timing and scoring system has completely given up the ghost. The latest I've got is that they were in 9th place, 2 laps down on the leaders. But that was after the leaders had completed 45 laps, which is before the pit stop started. So I'm afraid that's not much use to man nor beast. However, this wasn't the quicker of the Ferraris, but still a nice chance to look around the circuit. And we seem to have sound and vision tied up fairly nicely here, David. Noticeable, of course, the sequential gearbox. Push forward to change down, pull back to change up.
This gearbox makes life very easy for these racing cars. Gearboxes in endurance racing are the one thing that do tend to suffer a little bit, especially if you miss a gear here and there, then all of a sudden you take a tooth off somewhere. But with the sequential change gearbox, you can see that lever just sticking up there in the centre. They simply push it and they pull it, and that changes up and changes down. Quite often in these cars they have a little switch on the gear lever itself, which allows you to change up without actually lifting off the throttle. So you can actually change up while still flat out. So it makes life just that little bit easier, that little bit quicker, and everything's just so much neater. You can see in the car earlier when he was changing up some of the corners, we'd change up quite early and you'd see low revs. The reason for doing this is to try and keep the wheel spin down to a minimum as you're trying to get out of the tighter corners, the chicane corners. You've seen the car going through there. So it's what we call changing up early, trying to get the traction as best as possible to get out to that corner.
And of course a big normally aspirated engine, plenty of torque there as well to pull you through. Dieter Quester, our NGT leader now, which means I think that the Ferrari must have gone in for its final change. Well, the 12 car in the pits for a very long stop. Let's see if we can find out why from Boris de Richebourg.
Boris, you're currently in 4th position. Do you think that you'll be able to get onto the podium?
Yeah, we hope so. We went for slick right now at the last stint. So we hope it's going to be a good choice. Otherwise, we're going to be forced, but for sure, Vincent now is right up there. He's very quick. He's probably 10 seconds quicker than everybody because of the slicks. So we hope it's going to be a good choice, and then we build the podium. I hope so. Should be all right.
Thank you, Boris.
Well, David, as predicted, somebody somewhere with not an awful lot to lose and plenty to gain has gone for slicks, and they were in the top 2 before the pit stop started. So those guys now down to 4th after their stop and going 10 seconds a lap quicker. Confirmation, if it were needed, that slicks are the tyre, but the tyre of the moment. Now the question is, how much will that really be hindering the car sport car on its intermediates?
Well, he says 10 seconds a lap at the moment, and if it's 10 seconds a lap quicker than everybody else out there, it means the rest of the cars that have been in so far are also out there on intermediate tyres, and they're obviously the first team that's taken that risk to go to slicks. And certainly the people further back down the field that weren't right up at the sharp end, they're the ones that could and can afford to take the risk. Certainly if you're leading a race, there's nothing in this world would make you take a risk with a motor race because you want to win it, so you will take the easy option. And that's what the Hazelman car has done. It's taken the easy option. It's gone with the intermediate tyres because they know it's going to be safe. And there we are, one of the Belmondo cars with Vincent inside there, Vincent Voss. He's out there. 10 seconds a lap is a long time, and you can pull a lot of places back with 10 seconds a lap.
certainly can. I have to say, it looks as though they came in when they were in the top 3, and it looks as though they are just going for everything they can get. On board with Johnny Cecotto and his teammate for the weekend, a new teammate this weekend, Andrea Chiesa, the ex-Formula 3000 driver. Cecotto shared with Philip Pater at Monza, and Pater off on another clashing commitment this weekend. Won't be able to do all the series. Johnny Cecotto, they certainly hope at Auto Orlando will be able to. And they won first time out. New team, new car, new combination at Monza, and very happy indeed with that result. Well, there is the car that for the major part of the midsection of the race led the NGT class, the Ferrari. And David's still looking for a bit of rain or a bit of water.
These cars out there are still looking for whatever water they can get. We can see the front of that car has obviously had some damage at some point. Either he's run into the back of a slower car, or he has actually fallen off at some point. There's a great lump missing out of that front end of that Ferrari there. So while they're out there, and it looks as though they're in the lead at the moment, I'm sure they'll be praying that nothing else goes wrong, or no more bits and pieces fall off, and the bits that are left there at the front are still well fixed on. Otherwise, it could end up losing the whole of the front bumper, which won't do them any good whatsoever.
Well, they've dropped down since their pit stop in the NGT class. Dieter Quester leading in the 77 Red Bull car, which had a bit of a torrid time at Monza. So the Ferrari, having looked strong in the mid part of the race with 15 minutes left to go, now floundering further down in the order. And I'm afraid our timing and scoring still showing us nothing. The Bouchou car leads at the moment, though, from the Car Sport Holland machine. Vincent Vos is in 3rd, of course, on those slick tyres. Jamie Campbell-Walter in 4th place in the Lister Storm. Then Naspetti and Schiattarella's Ferrari. And then the Dames and Ilias GLPK Racing Viper is in 6th position. In NGT, it's still Dieter Quester leading in the 77 car. There he is. The Ferrari is in 2nd place. So they've still got a podium position on the cards. But whether they can now hold a car any likes to the Porsches remain to be seen. And I'm sure a lot of that in the end, David, is going to come down to what rubber is on what car.
Yes, certainly. The big problem is that the NGT cars will probably try and go through this race with one stop. So, you know, they may not come in unless they decide to take that big time difference, come in, lose that time in order to put the slicks on and try and gain more from that. But that, to me, is a very big risk with only something like 15, 17 minutes of this race left.
It is probably too late to make any of those kind of last-minute gambles. You can't rely on an American-style yellow flag, but there goes the NGT leader. He spins the lead away. Tim Sugden goes back by him. That's not a position change, but where is the Ferrari? How far behind? Well, in comes the 2nd place car now. Having just said it's probably too late to gamble, Mike Hasemans has decided that intermediates are going to kill his car and give him no chance of competing for a podium position, and he'll be better off losing a minute and going on to slicks, because he'll get that minute back in 5 laps or so of running on slick tyres compared to what he was doing on intermediates. So a last-minute roll of the dice for the Car Sport Holland guys. Drama in both classes shaping up in the final 15 minutes of this race. The NGT leader spins off, and surely then that must mean that he's not on the right tyres for these conditions. And Hasemans comes in from 2nd to take a gamble on slicks. And that leaves our race leader as Christophe Bouchou, surely on intermediate tyres and running slower than the cars chasing him. Dramatic moments as we come towards the close of this FIA GT race, because Christophe Bouchou, his car out front, but his closest challenger, Mike Hasemans, in the Car Sport Holland machine, has gone in for a 3rd pit stop to take on slick tyres. Now let's catch up with the retirement of Emmanuel Clerico.
2nd place, about to challenge for the lead, and what happened?
I think it's a fuel problem, because the engine stopped. I tried to bring back the car, but it was impossible. I was in 6th gear, and I had only the ralenti on the engine, so I was bop, bop, bop. but I still have 20 liters on the dashboard, so we don't know. We follow the consumption all the run, so I was supposed to stop in few laps to make the slick tires, because I saw it was faster with the slick, and I think it would have been a win, but...
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Well, more dramas then. It's starting to turn into a bit of a lottery, this race. The 12 car on slick tyres, we know, with Vincent Vos up into third place. Fastest lap 2:04.749. Now getting down to the sort of times that they managed in the best of the practice conditions.
Compared to what they were running about 2 minutes 20 earlier on, this is obviously a massive change. And everybody at the very last minute here at the end of this race, with 11 minutes to go, or just over 11 minutes to go, are suddenly making those decisions to take the extra pit stop, put on the slick racing tyres. When you can make a difference of over 10 or even 15 seconds a lap on some of these cars, then it doesn't take very long to get that time back when you're spending 30, 40, 50 seconds in the pits for a quick change.
Well, I did speculate at the beginning of this race that it was going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes of survival and see what position you were in the final 20 minutes. And that's where we are now, inside the final 10 now. Belloc leads, but on knackered tyres, surely. Vos closing on slicks. Hazeman's closing on slicks. Campbell Walter, well, I don't know what he's on, but he's in fourth place, and the Ferrari's running in fifth and sixth. The NGT leader is still the 77 Porsche. The Ferrari, the JMB 62 car you see there, in second place in NGT and closing after the leader's spin. Welcome back into the
30, 40, 50 seconds in the pitch for change.
Well, I did speculate at the beginning of the race that it was going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes of survival and see what position you were in the final 20 minutes. And that's where we are now, inside the final 10 now. Belloc leads, but on knackered tyres, surely. Vos closing on slicks. Hazeman's closing on slicks. Campbell Walter, well, I don't know what he's on, but he's in fourth place, and the Ferrari's running in fifth and sixth. The NGT leader is still the 77 Porsche. The Ferrari, the JMB 62 car you see there, second place in NGT and closing after the leader's spin. Welcome back into the dying minutes of the FIA GT race at Brno, round 2 of the championship, and the Labra competition car still leading from the Carsport Holland Viper in second place. Bouchou versus Hazemans. In third place, Vincent Vos, the number 12 car, now up to second place after Hazemans came in for a third tyre stop. That was after their normal changes. In their final change, or was planned to be final change, he took on intermediates, and clearly a matter of 5 or 10 laps told him that was not the tyre to have. Slicks were the thing to have, and he now has those. The question is, will it be in time? David Leslie, he's got a lot of chasing to do, and the clock is against him rather than any other factor, and that's one of those things that is very hard to deal with. Well, Christophe Bouchou in the pits at the moment, so his car out on track, and he will be watching with interest to see how that battle ends up. Let's hear now from Christophe Bouchou.
Christophe, just 10 minutes left now. You must be confident of victory.
Yes, we are really happy because the car is very good in dry condition. It was not good on the wet condition in the beginning of the race, and I was a bit disappointed, but the objective was to stay and to drive well and to stay on the racetrack, to do any mistake. So I'm very happy, but we need now again to stay on the racetrack in first position during, I don't know, 7 minutes. I cross the finger. I hope everything will be good.
Thank you, Christophe.
So I'm sure all of the team will cross the finger. Christophe Bouchou is Jean-Philippe Belloc at the helm, and this is the car that's most of a threat to them. Vincent Vos closing them down as he charges hard on his slicks. Now, what we could really have done with Simon asking in the pits was what tyres Bouchou's car was on, because that might have given us a clue as to how this final 6 or 7 minutes would go, David. He still seems to be able to turn in the lap times, 2:08s. That's not bad. The chasing car doing 2:04s.
It's not bad, but unfortunately it's not quite good enough. I have to get an educated guess that they're still out there on intermediates. They came in and took that decision a little bit earlier, and they've decided to stay out there. As you said, they've got some 7 minutes left and they've got their fingers crossed that they can simply hang on and keep on going sufficiently quick enough to be able just to get it to the finish and get it there in first place. The others have taken the risk. I mean, Hazelmans, who's led this race for such a long time now, is now down in third place. They took that extra pit stop to try and put on the slick tyres, but they did a little bit late. And Voss was out there first with the slicks, and he was, as we heard earlier, some 10 seconds a lap faster than the other cars with their intermediates. So now we've got these Belloc on first, Vincent Voss in second, and Hazelman in third. And now 1 lap down is Jamie Campbell-Walter, and we feel that he's probably on the intermediate tyres as well, because he wasn't that far down to start with before the pit stop. So immediately after the pit stop, he's been obviously losing time to the guys out there on the slicks. So he certainly will not be moving any further up, we don't think. But there we are watching the leader now, Belloc out there, and he's trying very hard to hang on to the front of this race. Just a few more minutes left. But unfortunately, as each minute goes past, then the cars behind them, both the Vincent Voss car and the Michael Hazelman car, they're catching him hand over fist, and we're looking now as far back as possible. We can't quite see this, so at least the lead of that start line straight at the moment, and on basis they're doing just over 2 minutes a lap. That's something like 3 laps left before they get there. And if it's live picture here, we can see them now. This is the second car coming into the start and finish straight now, so that's quite a good lead they've got. If they're still taking something like 4 or 5 seconds lap off on per lap, he might just make it, but at the end of this race it's going to be very, very close indeed.
It is indeed. So what looked like a comfortable lead for the number 7 car eked into in the middle stages of the race. The Carsport Holland car taking the lead and then running away with the race in the poor conditions. And still to be answered the question as to what happened to Christophe Bouchou at the start of the race. Maybe the fact that he's running reasonably quickly now on intermediate tyres, where clearly the slicks are quicker, means that the setup of the car lent more towards drying conditions than wet conditions. I can't believe that Bouchou really just couldn't drive in those early few laps when the car just plummeted down the order. Carsport Holland car there in third place. You saw Jamie Campbell-Walter coming across the start-finish line as Mike Hazelmans was turning into the first corner. So Campbell-Walter in fourth place and reasonably close, within sight, but not, I don't think, with a shot of a podium finish.
The cars here now, you can see on the circuit it's totally dry out there, so those people that have been in and taken that gamble on the slicks was certainly the right thing to do, but as we said earlier, it was definitely a gamble. It wasn't something that you would automatically have done, and Mike Hazelmans decided on the intermediate when he came in earlier than most for their tyre change, and those that hung on to use as much of their fuel as possible were able to come in and make that slightly better decision to go onto the slick racing tyres. That made all the difference.
Sixth place for the Ferrari, and I have to say that if he's on intermediates, they seem to be holding on pretty well, able to use all the power he wants to, braking nice and late, and look at his hands on the wheel. Nice comfortable radius around the corner, and that means the thing is tracking pretty much where he wants it to. Marc Duez, the Belgian, back at the wheel of the sixth place Ferrari, and both the Raffinelli cars on for a top 6 finish, which is excellent news for that young team. Not in terms of the real world, but in terms of the FIA world, certainly. Raffinelli only 2 races into this championship. 2 laps to go as we are within the final 5 minutes of the race. The Carsport Holland car, Mike Hazelmans, sharing with Jeroen Bleekemolen, and he is in third place. The gap there, 26.2 between first and second place, and I think that Jean-Philippe Belloc in the lead Labre competition Viper has got plenty enough to answer any challenge of Vincent Voss. We heard Christophe Bouchou hoping that their slicks will be enough to carry them to the front, but whatever is on the Labre competition car, whether it's slicks or intermediates, they've got enough in hand, David, and I don't think they're going to be caught unless something really silly happens, like he gets nudged from behind by a recently passed NGT car.
These things are all possible. That's what makes this GT racing so exciting. It isn't won until you cross that line, and things do go wrong and can go wrong on the last lap. But there we are, we can see the lead car out there now, he definitely is on intermediates. He's going slowly around the corners. He's trying to make those tyres last till the end of the race. 26 seconds ahead with 2 laps to go, and I think he's going to be able to hang in there and get to the finish. So although the car looked terrible at the beginning of the race, and the car went from the front of the grid all the way back to about 8th position, certainly having it set up, or it looks as though it was set up for a more dry track rather than a very wet track, then it's paid dividends towards the end. But that was a big risk to take to do that. It's paid off. I'm not sure I would have done that. We would have gone the way that the rest of the cars have gone and made sure that I could cope with the very wet conditions that are out there. We can see the team there just hoping that they can get through what looks like now the very last lap of this race, and he gets to the finish of this lap before the Vincent Voss, Paul Beaumondo entered car can get to him. Then he's going to be an extremely happy man at the end of this race.
I think so, and it'll be a job well done by all of those finishing in competitive positions, because when you look offline you can see not just the little tiny bits of rubbed off rubber that you normally see, but great chunks, huge solid tyre blocks and strips of tyre around the side of the track, and that shows you how hard the drivers have worked to keep their tyres going and to keep to a relatively normal pit stop strategy in what were very difficult and very changeable conditions. So full marks indeed to the Labre competition crew. Christophe Bouchou doing the first 2 stints, and to bring the car to the line, Jean-Philippe Belloc, who drove last year, of course, for the Belmondo racing team. And look at those, see those big bits of rubber you see, not just in the corners, but all over the place. One more lap is the gesture he's making, and I think he may be wrong. According to my watch, we have reached 2:40 Central European time, which is 3 hours after the race started, but then it's only my watch, and that's not what we run international motor racing on, sadly. So
we're pretty sure here that this is the last lap, and they've got very little distance to go now up this hill. There's a left-hander at the top of it, then a right-hander, and then that's them onto the start and finish straight. So here we are into the second last corner.
And again, you can see all those big lumps of rubber in the middle of the road, all those blocks of tyre that have just been thrown off as the tyres of the wet weather tyres have finally given up. And he's being pushed hard by the NGT car, but he won't care. Coming to take the checkered flag after 3 hours of racing, the Labre competition car wins. And Jean-Philippe Belloc, position number 1 on his board. There is Christophe Bouchou, who sowed the seeds for victory, handing over the lead car to Belloc for the final stint. And in second place will be the number 12 car, Vincent Voss and Boris de Richebourg's machine. Oh, and he's weaving side to side. I don't know whether that was a little salute to the team or the fact that he's got no fuel left. But the Labre competition team win in the GT class. And in third place will be car number 3, and that's the Carsport Holland Viper. So it's Vipers 1, 2 and 3. No podium finish for the Lister Storm team, but Christophe Bouchou will be very happy with that, as will Jean-Philippe Belloc. And I think after the disasters and disappointments of Monza, although Mike Hasemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen will be disappointed that that extra pit stop later in the race dropped them out of the lead, it's certainly a whole lot better than 2 weekends ago at Monza. And here is the battle for NGT, and that is a real reflection of their positions. The RWS Porsche just beating the JMB Ferrari to the line, and Dieter Quester winning despite dropping the car in the final 15 minutes. Didn't put it off the road, but spun it in the first left-right sequence, right-left sequence on this Brno racetrack, and just managed to hold off the Ferrari to the end. But that will be good news for the Ferraris as well, to be competitive in these dreadful conditions. It's quite a high downforce car, the Ferrari, not as slippery as the NGT Porsche. And that meant that at Monza, where low drag is everything, they were a little bit high and dry, perversely, for an Italian car. But David, I think the Ferrari might be much more of a feature in forthcoming races.
Yes, certainly it's improving all the time. When we spoke to them at Monza, they said Monza was definitely their worst circuit, and they did struggle there a little bit with those high-speed straights. But they've gone very well here all weekend, and they've been right up there. And as we see them finish the race there, right behind the leader, so that was very good for them. And I'm pretty sure that when the race isn't quite such a lottery with the weather the way it has been today, then they're going to be up there charging right at the front and making life very difficult for the Porsche cars that have had it their own way for such a long time nowadays.
Well, in comes the winner then, the GT and overall winner, Christophe Bouchou, and at the wheel, Jean-Philippe Belloc in the number 7 Chrysler Viper. Vincent Voss and Boris de Richebourg 18 seconds back. Mike Hasemans and Jeroen Bleekemolen sharing 3rd place in the number 3 Car Sport Holland Viper. In 4th spot, Jamie Campbell-Walter and Richard Dean, a minute 28 behind in the Lister Storm. And the 2 Ferraris, 5th and 6th positions for them, ahead of the 10 Belmondo car, the GLPK Viper in 8th place, and then the NGT winning RWS Motorsport car. The 2nd place in NGT for Ferrari, 3rd place in NGT for Jürgen von Gartzen and Bruno Eichmann, and all of them in the top dozen. And that very much a reflection of the wet weather conditions during this race.